Okay, in this video lecture, I want to talk a little bit about um, what a cultural agent is. If you've taken my class before, you've heard me, I'm sure, refer to cultural encounters, right? These kind of encounters historically that take place between people who come from different cultural worldviews or cultural lenses, right? And when they see each other from their own cultural lens, without either any sort of training or any sort of creative impulse to try to understand the other perspective. When they approach these encounters from their own cultural lens, it oftentimes leads to conflict, right? And we've seen that happen quite a bit throughout history, right? When the Europeans come over to the Americas, they encounter all these Native Americans, most famous the Aztecs and the conquistadors, do a lot of stuff there, or Francis Pizarro and the Incas, or Columbus and the Tano people. You go on, but these people who come from various different backgrounds encountering each other, leading to catastrophic events. However, through all of these things, there are groups of people who we like to call cultural agents, agents of transfer, cultural brokers, people who somehow have the ability to master uh, two or more worlds and fit in to various cultural uh, dimensions, so to speak, of a society. Um, you have them in all aspects. You have them today. If you took my History 1301 class, you may remember the term Atlantic Creoles, right? A new class of people who emerged through the course of the transatlantic slave trade that emerged in the Atlantic world between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, right? Some people who were Atlantic Creoles, they were linguistically dexterous or culturally plasticity, the ability to kind of understand culture, speak multiple languages, infer from what people are going through or talking about, right? These are all things that I mean when I use the term cultural agent or cultural broker. And in this unit, I want you to specifically think of this individual who you've encountered so far in this unit, named Quanah Parker, as a prime example of one of these cultural brokers. Um, Someone who mastered the Comanche society to the point in which he became one of the most famous chiefs, right? From a very humble background, in fact, although he had a rather powerful war chief father. Um, when that father died, he was sort of left with his siblings and his mother, who was a white woman, right, who had been taken, Cynthia Ann Parker. By now, I imagine, if you've been listening to anything in this unit, um, she was taken at a young age and then survived to become a Comanche almost, and then she was taken, sort of so-called rescued back into white society, where she was extremely depressed and continued to try to go back out to Comanche life. That's an interesting story in and of itself. But here I'm talking about cultural agents. In fact, you could make the argument that Cynthia Ann Parker is a good example of a cultural agent because she lived in white society until she was 11, and she was kidnapped or taken into Comanche life, and then became the wife of a very important leader there. Um, right? Whereas some of the other people who she was kidnapped with were killed pretty quickly or died off on their own. Um, and there are a number of different examples of people like this, right? But the reason we're talking about Quanah here is because, Quanah became uh, a very important, wealthy businessman in white society, which was something that was very difficult for Indians to do. Again, if you've taken my class before, you may have heard me mention that it was far easier for Europeans during the Age of Exploration, or U.S. Americans after the American Revolution. It was much easier for those people to leave white society and become part of a various Indian tribe than it was for any Indian to leave their society and become part of one of these societies. That's one of the things that makes Quanah Parker unique. However, remember he had a white mother, and he eventually took this name Parker as signifying his family lineage. If you look at him, he looks complete Indian, although he had blue eyes. So one could make the argument that his uniqueness made him stand out, and uh, helped. kind of bring him to prominence. But it was also his inquisitiveness, his ability to learn English and read and write very quickly, use that towards his advantage, his ability to use the things that he saw white people gaining success in their capitalist society to his and his people's advantage. And this is what led to him becoming extremely successful after him and his people um, resigned the fate of the old ways in 1875, uh, after they tried to continue their society and continue the way of living that they were used to after the big massacre in Palo Duro Canyon that took place in 1874, when their horses and their teepees were all burned and killed. And of course, the horse is the most important thing in a Comanche society, and they tried to continue hunting the buffalo after that didn't work. So they eventually resigned their fate. Instead of fighting to the death, they accepted and lost with dignity. And Quanah Parker transitioned to this type of life that was very successful. And so think about that term, cultural broker. What is it? Why do some people have this ability to be very malleable, and others maybe are very rigid, which is interesting. You know, culture is like that. There are very rigid aspects to culture that people see as protective and important. But then again, no culture has ever existed in a vacuum. All cultures, even the most exclusive ones or remote ones, or ones that we don't hear much about, like North Korea, um, are nevertheless byproducts of cultural exchanges over time, because people migrate. When they migrate, as you've heard me say multiple times, they don't leave their culture behind. When people leave, they bring their culture with them, and they have an influence on the mosaic of the society that they make their way to. Quanah Parker is a prime example of one of these bridges, these people who can bridge these cultural gaps.